The text message read, "He took Mum. I'm alone in the dark." 8-year-old Julie Sapp's fingers were shaking so hard she could barely type. Her mother was gone, dragged unconscious through the front door while Julie watched through a crack in her bedroom door, too terrified to scream. The phone number Julie texted wasn't her aunt's. It wasn't the police. It was Edward Brewer, president of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, a man she'd never met, a stranger who had no reason to care. But when his phone buzzed at 9:34 p.m. and he read those 7 words, the Iron Wolves did something that would change everything. Welcome back to the channel. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens in the next 16 minutes will prove that sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right one. The house at 2847 Riverside Drive had seen better days. Chipped paint on the window frames, a front step that creaked under weight, a mailbox hanging by a single screw. But it was home. It was safe. Or at least, it had been safe until tonight. Tonight, the only sound that filled that small living room was terror. Cold, calculated, predatory terror. Derek Holloway stood in the center of the room, his hands steady despite the violence radiating from every movement. This wasn't rage. This was purpose. The kind of purpose that comes from owing money to people who don't accept excuses, who don't grant extensions, who collect debts in ways that made national headlines. 20,000 pounds. That's what he owed to a trafficking network that operated out of maritime warehouses and luxury hotels. People who traded in human cargo the way others traded stocks. Claire Sapp lay crumpled on the living room floor, blood matting her blonde hair where Derek had struck her with the lamp base. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, unconscious breaths. She'd seen the messages on his phone. She'd threatened to call the police. She'd sealed her own fate. Derek had been careful for 6 months. 6 months of playing the devoted boyfriend, the man who'd turned his life around, the one who brought flowers on Fridays and helped Julie with her homework. 6 months of patience while he positioned Claire exactly where he needed her, isolated from family, dependent on him, trusting. But trust is a weapon in the wrong hands. And Derek's hands had never been right. "Come on, sweetheart," Derek muttered, grabbing Claire under the arms. His voice was eerily gentle, the same tone he'd used to read Julie bedtime stories just 2 weeks ago. "Time to go. You're worth more than you know." Upstairs, hidden behind her bedroom door, 8-year-old Julie Sapp pressed her small hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She'd heard the argument. She'd heard the thud. She'd heard her mother's single cut-off cry before the silence swallowed everything. She'd learned to make herself invisible in this house, to disappear into her closet when Derek's mood shifted, to pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else, until the danger passed. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like something was breaking that couldn't be put back together. Tonight felt like the last chance to be brave. If you've ever felt powerless watching someone you love in danger, drop a comment saying, "Never again." Because what this 8-year-old does next will restore your faith in courage. What Derek did next would make him the target of both the police and a motorcycle club known for protecting the innocent. But the real hero of this story? She was hiding upstairs, clutching a phone with trembling hands, and she was only 8 years old. 23 miles across town, in a building most people drove past without looking twice, Edward Brewer sat at a scarred wooden table reviewing patrol schedules for the week. The Iron Wolves clubhouse wasn't much to look at from the outside. Weathered brick, barred windows, motorcycles lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. But inside, it was home to men who'd found brotherhood when the world had written them off. Edward, at 45, had built this chapter from nothing over 18 years. His graying beard and tattooed arms told stories he rarely spoke aloud, and the leather cut draped across his shoulders bore a single word that carried weight: President. Around him, brothers played pool, nursed beers, talked low about runs and rides, the quiet rhythm of men who'd chosen this life and meant to live it right. His phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. Edward's thumb hovered over the screen, ready to swipe it away. Spam. Wrong number. Some kid who'd... Something made him look. He took Mum. I'm alone in the dark. Please help me. I'm scared. Edward read it once, twice, 3 times, his jaw tightening with each pass. The typos, the desperate punctuation. The voice of pure terror bleeding through 7 simple words. This wasn't spam. This was a child in crisis. The memory hit him like a fist. His sister's face, 20 years gone, taken by men who traded in human suffering. The helplessness that had nearly destroyed him. The vow he'd made then. Never again. Never helpless again. Violence against women and children crossed every line the Iron Wolves stood for. And some terrified kid who'd reached out blindly in the darkness had just become their own. Edward didn't hesitate. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear, his other hand already raised toward Reaper across the room, the signal that something was happening. The phone rang once, twice. A small, broken voice answered. Hello? Sobbing, hitching breaths. Pure animal terror. My name's Edward, he said, his voice dropping into a gentleness that would have surprised anyone who only knew him from across a courtroom. I got your message. Tell me where you are, okay? Who are you? Where's Aunt Sarah? The confusion in her voice nearly broke through into fresh panic. The message came to me instead, Edward said, steady and certain. That's okay. I'm going to help you, but I need to know where you are. What's your address? 2847. 2847 Riverside Drive. The words came out between sobs. Good girl. That's so good. Now, is the man still there? Is he in the house? No. Relief and fear tangled in that single word. He took her. He took my mum and left. Edward was already moving, phone clamped to his ear. Reaper, Chains, Gunner, Hawk, now! 4 men dropped everything and converged on him. No questions, no hesitation. When the president called like that, you moved. We got a child alone. Mother abducted, Edward said, his voice hard as iron. Domestic situation turned trafficking. We roll now. Smash that like button if you believe real men protect children, no matter what colors they wear, because what these bikers do in the next 10 minutes will rewrite everything you thought you knew about heroes. 4 Harleys roared to life like thunder announcing a storm. As 4 motorcycles tore out of that parking lot and screamed through the streets, Edward kept talking to an 8-year-old girl he'd never met, keeping her calm, keeping her from drowning in fear while they closed the distance between terror and salvation. 4 Harleys cut through the night like bullets, formation tight, purpose absolute. Edward led the pack. Phone still pressed to his ear beneath his helmet, his right hand steady on the throttle while his entire focus split between the road ahead and the small, terrified voice on the line. Julie, baby, you still there? I'm here. Her voice was so small, so broken. Edward kept her talking, kept her anchored to his voice like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in dark water. Tell me about your mum. What does she like to do? Julie's response came between sobs, words stumbling over each other. She makes pancakes on Sunday, with chocolate chips. She always burns the first one and we laugh about it. That sounds perfect, Edward said, his voice steady, even as his heart hammered. I bet they're delicious. Then came the question he'd been dreading. The one that cut through everything else with the clarity only a child's fear could produce. Is my mom going to die? Edward could have lied, could have given her easy comfort, false promises. But children know when you're lying to them. especially children who've already learned that adults can't always protect them from monsters. "Not tonight," Edward said, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "Not while I'm breathing." The weight of that promise settled over him like a physical thing. 20 years ago, he'd made a similar promise to his sister. He'd failed. She'd vanished into a network of evil that swallowed people whole, leaving nothing but grief and rage in their wake. Not again. Never again. 10:03 p.m., 16 minutes from text to arrival. Riverside Drive stretched before them, broken pavement, flickering streetlights. Houses that sagged under the weight of poverty and neglect. The kind of place where bad things happened behind closed doors, and neighbors learned not to look too close. Number 2847 sat dark, except for a single dim lamp glowing through a gap in the curtains. 4 bikes pulled up to the curb with a synchronized rumble, engines cutting almost in unison. The sudden silence felt heavy, expectant. "I'm here, Julie," Edward said into the phone, his voice gentler now that the distance had collapsed to just a door and a few feet. "Right outside your front door. Can you unlock it for me?" He heard movement inside. Small footsteps, the scrape of locks being turned by hands too small to reach them easily. The door opened slowly, hesitantly. What Edward saw made every protective instinct in his body scream to move, to act, to fix this. Julie Sapp was tiny, 8 years old but looking younger. All big eyes and tear-stained cheeks and trembling lips. Her pajamas had yellow stars printed on them. Her mother's phone was clutched in both hands like a talisman. The complete innocence of childhood collided with absolute terror in a way that physically hurt to witness. Edward dropped to one knee, making himself smaller, less intimidating, more human than the leather-clad biker with the graying beard and the patches that made grown men nervous. "Hey there, Julie," he said softly. "You're safe now. We've got you." He opened his arms, not grabbing, not forcing, just offering. Julie collapsed into them like someone who'd been holding themselves together through sheer will and had finally found permission to break. Her small body shook with sobs that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. "Turn on notifications right now because what happens when they search the house will make your blood run cold. This isn't just a rescue mission anymore. It's a race against a trafficking network." Behind Edward, Reaper and Chains swept through the house with practiced efficiency. Living room, overturned chair, broken picture frame, signs of a struggle that had ended badly. Kitchen, Claire's purse still on the counter, keys in their bowl. She hadn't left willingly. "Ed," Chain's voice came from the bedroom, tight with controlled anger. "You need to see this." Derek's laptop sat open on the bed, abandoned in his panic. Text messages filled the screen. Cold, transactional conversations about merchandise and delivery schedules and outstanding debts. Reaper read over Chain's shoulder, his face darkening with each line. "He's not just some violent boyfriend. He's a courier, trafficking network, and he's behind on payments." Edward's stomach dropped as the full horror clicked into place. Claire wasn't taken in rage. She was taken as currency, human collateral for Derek's debt. The timestamps told a story written in nightmare logic. Handoff scheduled for midnight at Old Riverside Industrial Park, Building 7. Edward checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. They had just over an hour. But the industrial complex had 15 buildings, and the messages weren't specific about which warehouse. Julie lifted her tear-stained face from Edward's leather cut and whispered words that would change everything. "I know where they took her. I've been there before." "You've been there?" Edward pulled back just enough to look Julie in the eyes, his hands steady on her small shoulders. "When, sweetheart? When did you see this place?" Julie's voice came out small but certain, the way children sound when they're trying to be brave even though everything inside them is screaming. 3 days ago. Derek said he was scouting a property for his new business. Mom thought it was a warehouse investment, something legitimate. Edward and his brothers exchanged dark looks. They'd all seen enough of the world's ugliness to know exactly what kind of business required warehouse investments with certain features. "What did you see there?"
"Julie," Edward asked gently, "tell me everything you remember."
"There were chains on the walls," Julie whispered, her eyes distant with the memory. "And mattresses on the floor. Not real beds, just mattresses. And the doors." Her voice caught. "The doors had locks on the outside, not the inside. I asked Derek why, and he said it was for security, but it didn't feel right." A child's observation cutting through an adult's carefully constructed lie. Julie had seen what her mother couldn't, or wouldn't, see. She'd felt the wrongness of that place in her bones. "We call the cops, right?" Gunner's voice was tight. "This is kidnapping, trafficking. We get the authorities." Edward's jaw tightened. "By the time cops get warrants and move through channels, she'll be gone," Reaper finished, his voice flat with certainty. "Moved through the pipeline. These networks don't wait around." Chains crossed his tattooed arms. "We handle this our way. Then we call the cops." The code they lived by, written into the very fabric of who they were. Protect those who can't protect themselves, even if it meant operating in the gray spaces where the law moved too slow and justice came too late. "You're staying here with Sarah," Edward said to Julie, reaching for his phone to call one of the club's old ladies. "She'll take care of you while we—" "No!" Julie's breakdown was complete and devastating. "Please, I need to come. If I stay here, I'll never know if you saved her. Please, I need to know she's alive." Comment, "Protect the innocent." If you believe an 8-year-old deserves to know her mother is safe, because what Edward decides next will either save a family or destroy one forever. Edward saw something in her eyes that stopped him cold. The same fire he'd had as a kid. The same desperate refusal to be helpless that had driven him into this life, this brotherhood, this code. She'd already watched her mother dragged away. She'd already lost everything that made her world safe. Taking away her hope, too, would break something in her that might never heal. "Ed," Reaper said quietly, warning in his voice, "if this goes sideways—" Edward cut him off. "She's already seen her mother taken. She's already lost everything. We don't take her hope, too." The brothers understood. They'd all been powerless once. They'd all known what it meant to stand by while someone you loved disappeared into darkness. The preparation was swift and efficient. Gear check. No guns, too risky legally, but bolt cutters, zip ties, tactical flashlights. Tools that could do damage without crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Reaper grabbed his medical kit from his bike. Always prepared. Chains checked his phone, sending a quick text to his contact in the police department. On standby, ready to move when called. Hawk fueled up Edward's F-150. Julie would ride in the truck, not on a bike. Safer that way. 20 minutes later, Julie sat in the passenger seat of Edward's truck, 4 motorcycles following in tight formation behind them. Her voice was small but certain as she navigated. "Turn left here, past the old mill. See that blue building?" Edward's hand covered hers on the seat between them. "You're doing great, sweetheart." Riverside Industrial Park loomed ahead, abandoned warehouses and rusted fencing, the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody looked twice. The perfect location for crimes that needed darkness and silence. Julie pointed to a warehouse with boarded windows and doors hanging crooked on their hinges. "That's it," she whispered. "That's where the chains were." Edward checked his watch. 11:34 p.m. 26 minutes until midnight. 26 minutes to save Claire's life. Edward parked the F-150 200 yards out, hidden behind a rusted shipping container that had been abandoned to the elements years ago. He turned to Julie, his voice gentle but firm.
Lock the doors. Duck down if you hear anything.
I'll be back. Julie nodded, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd grabbed from home, a worn thing with one ear missing that had probably comforted her through 100 childhood fears. None of them as real as this. Edward and his brothers approached the warehouse on foot, their movements practiced and precise. Years of riding together had taught them to move as one unit, to anticipate each other's actions without words. They circled the perimeter like wolves, checking exits, counting vehicles, reading the scene. 3 cars sat outside, Derek's sedan and 2 others. Dim light leaked from high windows. The building was occupied. Chains spotted a security camera mounted above the loading dock, but a closer look revealed dangling wires. Broken, non-functional. These people weren't worried about surveillance. Reaper pressed his ear near a gap in the metal siding. 4 men, maybe more, he whispered. And women, crying, begging. The sounds made Edward's blood run cold. He'd heard those sounds before, 20 years ago, in nightmares that never quite left him. They found a crack in the loading dock door wide enough to see through. What lay beyond was worse than any of them had imagined, even knowing what they knew. The warehouse's interior was a monument to human evil. Large open space, concrete floor, and along one wall, cages. Actual cages, the kind meant for animals, now holding 5 women in various states of terror. Claire was there, barely conscious, zip-tied, fresh bruising blooming across her face like poisonous flowers. 4 other women huddled in adjacent cages, their eyes hollow with the kind of fear that comes from knowing exactly what fate awaits them. 3 men occupied the warehouse floor. Derek knelt on the concrete, hands clasped together in supplication. A larger man, Marcus, from the way he carried himself, checked his phone with casual indifference. A third man, Victor, counted money with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this transaction 100 times before. Buyers arrive in 15, Marcus said, his accent thick and Eastern European. Quality better be as promised, or you owe us more than just her. Derek's voice cracked with desperation. I brought her like you asked. We're square now, right? Please, we're square? Marcus's laugh was colder than winter. You're square when I say you're square. The brothers regrouped at the truck. Strategy session in rapid whispers, each man knowing his role before Edward spoke it aloud. Can't wait for police, Edward said. No time. Women will be moved. Reaper assessed it clinically. 5 victims, 3 hostiles. We have tactical advantage. Surprise. I've got bolt cutters, Chain said. 30 seconds to free them all. Gunner. Exits covered. They run. We're ready. Hawk glanced at the truck where Julie waited, her small face visible through the window. What about the kid? Edward saw her watching, saw the hope and terror warring in her 8-year-old eyes. He remembered his sister, remembered being helpless, remembered the vow he'd made. We go in fast. We go in hard. No hesitation. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Chains, you're on cage duty. Reaper, medical. Gunner, Hawk. Crowd control. I take point. I get to Claire first. Silent agreement passed between them. They'd trained for this. They'd lived for moments like this. 11:53 p.m. 7 minutes to midnight. Hit that share button because what happens in this warehouse will restore your faith that good still exists, and that sometimes it wears leather and rides a Harley. 4 men moved through shadows with the precision of a surgical strike team. Edward signaled. Chains to loading dock, others to side entrance. Final check. Everyone ready. Edward's hand found the door handle. His other hand gripped the tactical flashlight hard enough to use as a weapon if needed. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. Then, controlled explosion of movement. The door slammed open with a sound like thunder. Edward's voice cut through the warehouse like a blade. Nobody move! This ends now! But what he saw in that frozen moment, Claire's terrified eyes meeting his, Derek's desperate lunge for a weapon on the nearby table, Marcus reaching for his phone to call reinforcements, meant the rescue was about to become a war. Edward's presence filled the warehouse doorway, 6'2" of leather and authority, a man who'd spent decades learning how to command a room with nothing but his voice and his will. The traffickers froze. They hadn't expected resistance, hadn't expected anyone to care enough to come. Marcus recovered first, his hand shooting toward the gun on the metal table beside him. But Reaper was faster. A single kick sent the table spinning, the gun skittering across concrete and disappearing into shadows. Derek bolted for the side exit, panic overriding whatever remained of his survival instinct. Gunner materialized in his path like a wall of muscle and fury. One solid punch dropped Derek to the concrete, blood streaming from his nose. Victor pulled a knife from his belt and lunged at Chains with the desperate violence of a cornered animal. But Chains was ex-Marine, trained in combat that made street fighting look like children playing. 3 moves: block, twist, disarm. The blade clattered away across the floor. Marcus made for his phone, fingers reaching for the screen to call reinforcements. Edward intercepted, grabbed the device, and smashed it against the wall with enough force to shatter it into pieces. The fight that followed was brief and brutal. These weren't random thugs. They had training, experience, cruelty honed by years of preying on the helpless. But they weren't facing random civilians either. They were facing men who'd spent decades protecting their own, who'd trained for exactly this kind of confrontation. Amid the chaos, Chains worked on the cages with bolt cutters, metal screeching as locks broke and doors swung open. The first woman freed collapsed immediately, legs that hadn't supported weight in days refusing to cooperate. The second and third helped each other, terrified but moving, the instinct to survive overriding everything else. Claire's cage was next. Chains cut through the lock faster, his movements urgent. She was semi-conscious, mumbling words that didn't quite form sentences, her eyes unfocused and glassy. Edward knelt beside her, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as he cut the zip ties from her wrists. Her eyes struggled to focus, confusion and fear warring across her bruised face. "Who?" "I've got you," Edward said quietly. "Your daughter sent me." The tears came immediately. "Julie. Is she... She's safe. She's brave. She saved your life." Edward lifted Claire carefully, cradling her against his chest as he carried her toward the exit. Behind him, the warehouse was controlled chaos. Women being freed, traffickers being secured, the machinery of justice beginning to turn. Derek, bloodied and cornered, made one final desperate play. He grabbed a broken bottle from the floor and held it toward Hawk with shaking hands. "You don't understand. They'll kill me. I had no choice." Edward's response was cold as winter. "You always have a choice. You chose wrong." Hawk disarmed Derek with practiced ease, zip-tied his wrists behind his back, and left him face down on the concrete to contemplate his choices. Reaper moved among the freed women, doing rapid medical assessment. 2 had injuries requiring immediate attention. All were severely dehydrated. One woman, Maria, she said her name was, spoke through tears and trauma. "There are more. 2 more. They took them yesterday." Edward's stomach dropped. "Where?" "Different location. I heard an address, 4700 Maritime Street." The trafficking network was bigger than they'd thought. This wasn't an isolated operation. It was a network, a system, a machine that processed human beings like cargo. Sirens wailed in the distance. Chains had made the call. Police en route. But Marcus had gotten a partial message out before his phone was destroyed. More traffickers might be coming. They needed to evacuate now. 4 brothers, 5 rescued women, 3 subdued traffickers. Reaper and Gunner supported the injured women. Chains secured the traffickers with zip ties and cold efficiency. Edward carried Claire toward the exit while Hawk covered their retreat, watching for additional threats. They burst from the warehouse into cool night air. Julie saw them from the truck window. Her door flew open and she was running, stumbling, crying her mother's name. "Mom! Mom!" Edward brought Claire to the truck and laid her gently in the back seat. Julie climbed in, cradling her mother's head with infinite care, her small hands touching her mother's face as if to confirm she was real. "Mom, wake up. Please wake up." Claire's eyes fluttered open, focused, found her daughter's face. "Julie, baby." Mother and daughter dissolved into tears, holding each other while the world spun chaos around them. If this moment doesn't make you believe in the power of never giving up, check your pulse, because an 8-year-old just taught us all what real courage looks like. Red and blue lights flooded the industrial complex. Police cars screeched to a halt, doors flying open, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. Edward's phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. The message was simple and terrifying. "You have something of ours. We're coming for it. And for you." The rescue was over. The war had just begun. Multiple police units flooded the industrial complex, their lights painting the night in strobing blue and red. Detective Sarah Morrison led the response, a veteran of 16 years who'd seen enough darkness to recognize it when she found it. Her eyes swept from the Iron Wolves' leather cuts to the freed women huddled near ambulances to the 3 zip-tied men on the ground. Suspicion hardened her features. "Explain," she said to Edward, her hand resting near her weapon. "Now." Edward explained calmly, methodically. Wrong number text. Child in danger. No time for proper channels. He showed her his phone. Message timestamp, call logs, the entire digital trail that proved his story wasn't fiction. Morrison's skepticism shifted as she read Julie's desperate words. Grudging respect replaced suspicion. "You should have called us first." By the time you got warrants, she'd be in a shipping container headed overseas. Edward's voice was flat with certainty. "We both know how this works." Morrison couldn't argue. She'd seen too many cases where bureaucracy moved slower than evil. The forensics team processed the warehouse like archaeologists excavating a tomb of horrors. 5 freed women being evaluated by paramedics, their hollow eyes speaking volumes about what they'd endured. 3 traffickers in custody, Derek sobbing, Marcus silent with cold calculation, Victor nursing a broken jaw. Evidence everywhere. Cages, chains, documents listing human beings like inventory. "This is bigger than one operation," Morrison said, scanning the scene. "This is organized, professional." Derek broke immediately under questioning, words spilling out in a desperate cascade. Names, addresses, the entire trafficking network laid bare in exchange for whatever mercy the court might show. He confirmed Maria's information. 4700 Maritime Street held 2 more women. But then he added something that made Morrison's face pale. "Nikolai Volkov runs this. He's connected. Russian mob, political protection, everything. He won't stop. He'll come for anyone who touched his operation." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Volkov? This just went federal." St. Mary's Hospital, 2:17 a.m. Claire was rushed into examination, Julie refusing to leave her side, Edward refusing to leave Julie. The doctor's assessment came wrapped in careful professional language, severe dehydration, extensive bruising, psychological trauma that would take years to process. But alive. She would make a full physical recovery. Social services arrived with Ms. Patterson, a well-meaning woman armed with protocols and procedures that didn't account for 8-year-olds who'd just watched their mothers dragged into trafficking networks. "We need to place Julie in protective custody," Patterson said firmly. "This is a federal case now. We have protocols." Julie's panic was immediate and visceral. No, don't take me from my mom! Edward stepped between them, his presence creating a physical barrier. She's been through enough. She stays with her mother. Detective Morrison intervened, suggesting a compromise. Family stays together, police protection, regular check-ins. Patterson reluctantly agreed, but the threat remained unspoken. This was temporary. Edward checked his phone. The threatening message glowed on the screen like a promise of violence. He showed it to Chains, who'd already been gathering intel through his network of informants. Volkov's people know who hit the warehouse, Chains said quietly. They're asking questions. Iron Wolves are targets now. But more critically, Reaper added, appearing beside them, Claire and Julie are witnesses. They're at risk. An emergency meeting was called at the clubhouse. Every member present, every face grave with understanding of what they were facing. Claire and Julie need more than police protection, Edward said to the assembled brothers. They need us. Reaper voiced what everyone was thinking. We take them in? Make them family? Edward's response was simple and absolute. She's 8 years old. She texted a stranger for help, and that stranger was us. That means something. The vote was called. Every hand went up. Unanimous. Subscribe and turn on notifications because what's coming next will prove that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everyone else runs away. The club owned property 40 miles outside the city. A remote cabin, secure, defensible, off any grid that Volkov's network could easily trace. Edward proposed Claire and Julie stay there until the threat was neutralized. He'd personally stay with them. Other brothers would rotate guard duty. Back at the hospital, Claire learned the full story from Julie. The wrong number, Edward's response, the rescue that shouldn't have been possible. She broke down crying, words failing to express what she felt. Your daughter saved you, Edward said quietly. She refused to give up. Everything after was just following her lead. Claire pulled Julie close. You're the bravest person I know. Detective Morrison pulled Edward aside as he prepared to move Claire and Julie to the safe house. Her face was grim. The raid on Maritime Street? We found the 2 women Maria mentioned. But we also found something else. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Evidence that Volkov knows where you live. He knows everything about you. Your clubhouse, your home, your brothers. And he's putting a price on your head. Edward's blood ran cold. The war hadn't just begun. It had come home. The Maritime Street raid had yielded more than just 2 rescued women. Federal agents found sophisticated surveillance equipment, cameras, listening devices, and most damning of all, dossiers. Thick files containing photos of the Iron Wolves clubhouse, members' homes, vehicle registrations, family connections, everything. Volkov had been watching them for months, though for different reasons. The club had disrupted several of his smaller operations over the years without realizing they were all connected to one network. Now the trafficking interruption had given him motive to strike. They weren't just targets, they were marked men. Edward drove the unmarked van through pre-dawn darkness, Claire and Julie in the back, Reaper and Chains following on bikes as escort. 2 hours to the cabin, 2 hours of watching mirrors for headlights that might mean trouble. Julie slept against her mother, exhausted beyond fear. Claire's eyes were haunted, fixed on Edward's reflection in the rearview mirror. What have I brought into your life? She whispered. This isn't your fault, Edward said firmly. This is on Derek, on Volkov, on men who prey on the innocent. You didn't bring this. They did. The cabin materialized from the woods like something from a fairy tale, though this one came with solar panels and security sensors instead of magic. Remote, surrounded by dense forest, single-access road that could be watched and defended. Well water, fully stocked pantry, 2 bedrooms. Gunner was already there, installing perimeter sensors with the methodical precision of someone who defended positions in places much worse than rural England. This is home for now, Edward said, showing them around. "You're safe here." Back at the clubhouse, an emergency meeting drew the entire chapter, 30 members filling the space with leather and tension. Detective Morrison sent a liaison with grim news. FBI was involved now, but federal bureaucracy moved slow. Volkov moved fast. Intel suggested a hit planned within 48 hours. Target, not just Edward, but the entire leadership. "We can't hide forever," Edward said to his assembled brothers. "Can't let Volkov dictate terms." Chain's contact in the organized crime unit provided critical information. Volkov operated from a waterfront property, heavily guarded. But more importantly, he had a meeting scheduled with other network leaders. If the Iron Wolves struck during that meeting, they could take out multiple heads of the Hydra at once. It was risky. It was probably stupid. But it beat waiting to die. Life at the cabin took on strange domesticity. Edward cooked dinner, surprisingly good pasta that made Julie's eyes go wide, and taught her basic self-defense moves in the small clearing behind the cabin. "Hope you never need it," he said, showing her how to break a grip. "But if you do, you'll know." "You're nothing like I thought bikers would be," Julie said, her 8-year-old honesty cutting through years of stereotypes. Claire watched them from the porch, seeing Edward not as the monster society painted, but as the protector he'd always been. They talked that night, after Julie went to bed, about Edward's lost sister, about Claire's history with men like Derek, about how they were both survivors of different wars. Understanding formed between them, deeper than words. 2:00 a.m., second night at the cabin. Perimeter sensors screamed electronic warning. Edward woke instantly, years of light sleeping paying dividends. "We've got company." Gunner's voice was calm over the radio. 4 vehicles, 8, maybe 10 hostiles. Edward moved to Claire's room, knocked once. "Get Julie. Continue 1:27 a.m. Basement, now. Don't come out until I say." Claire's eyes were terrified. "What about you?" "I'm keeping you safe. That's what I do." Edward and Gunner took defensive positions, backup called. Reaper, Chains, Hawk, 30 minutes out, maybe less if they pushed it. The intruders spread out with professional precision, not random thugs, trained operators with military backgrounds, Volkov's A-team, shots fired, testing defenses. Edward returned fire, legally defending his property. Gunner used spotlights to blind attackers. Stalemate developed. Intruders couldn't breach, but Edward couldn't leave his position. A bullhorn crackled. Dimitri's voice, thick with accent. "Send out Brewer. Everyone else lives." Edward's response cut through the night. "Come and get me." Then, like Salvation wearing leather, the roar of motorcycles. Not 3 brothers, 15. The entire chapter descending on the cabin like cavalry from an old western. 8 intruders suddenly faced 17 Iron Wolves. Dimitri made the calculation instantly. Abort. Vehicles retreated, tires squealing, leaving only Dimitri's parting shot through the bullhorn. "Volkov says this isn't over." Dawn broke. Iron Wolves stood guard, adrenaline slowly fading. Edward's phone buzzed. Encrypted message from Detective Morrison. "FBI raid on Volkov scheduled for tonight, but there's a leak. He knows, he's running, and his last communication mentioned one target, the cabin. He's coming for you himself." What Edward didn't know was that Volkov wasn't just coming to kill him. He was coming to send a message to anyone who dared interfere with his business, and that message would be written in blood, starting with an 8-year-old girl who dared to ask for help. The FBI raid was compromised. A mole in the department had tipped Volkov, and rather than wait for arrest, he was going scorched earth, taking his core team, coming for Edward personally. Detective Morrison's voice was tight over the phone. "Evacuation recommended. We can't guarantee protection." Edward's response was immediate and absolute. "No, we end this here. Now. Today." The entire Iron Wolves chapter descended on the cabin within hours. 30 men fortifying positions, building barricades, preparing for war. FBI agent Collins arrived with reluctant intel, his face skeptical as he surveyed the scene. "This is insane, you're civilians." Reaper's response was cold as stone. "We're men protecting a mother and child. What are you?" Collins provided what he knew. Volkov's convoy, 5 vehicles, 20 armed men, estimated arrival time. He suggested strategy. Let FBI ambush the convoy on approach. Iron Wolves hold the cabin as backup. Edward agreed. It was the smart play. But Volkov hadn't survived this long by being predictable. In the basement bunker, reinforced, supplied, a safe room built for exactly this scenario, Julie looked up at Edward with eyes too old for 8 years. "Will we be okay?" Edward knelt to her level, his scarred hands gentle on her small shoulders. "Yes. Because you've got 30 uncles upstairs who die before letting anything happen to you." Claire's eyes met his over Julie's head. Unspoken emotion passed between them. Gratitude, fear, something deeper that neither was ready to name. Edward's hand found Claire's shoulder. "This ends today. Then you're free." 4:00 p.m. Volkov's convoy spotted 10 miles out. The FBI set their roadblock at the 5-mile mark, officers in tactical gear taking positions behind vehicles. Edward watched from the cabin, weapon ready, hoping the plan would work. It didn't. The convoy hit the roadblock in a storm of gunfire, but it was diversion. A secondary team had split off earlier, taking an old logging road that approached the cabin from behind. Perimeter sensors screamed warning. Volkov himself, 6 men, emerging from the tree line like wolves. Edward's realization was instant and cold. He knew about the roadblock. He used it against us. Volkov's team was heavily armed, combat-trained, professional. They emerged from the woods in tactical formation. Edward met them in the clearing, standing alone, leather cut marking him as president. "You want me? Here I am." Volkov stepped forward. Cold eyes, calculating smile, a man who'd built an empire on human suffering. "You cost me millions, Brewer. Destroyed my network, took my merchandise." Edward's voice was steady as bedrock. "They're human beings, not merchandise. And this ends today." Volkov raised his weapon. Edward dove left. The world erupted into chaos. Gunfire, hand-to-hand combat, iron wolves engaging across the property. Reaper took down 2 men with brutal efficiency, Marine training making the fight look easy. Chains disarmed another with 3 precise moves. Hawk and Gunner worked as a team, covering each other's backs. Edward and Volkov faced each other in the center of the storm, one-on-one. Edward's street fighting against Volkov's systema training. Brutal, desperate, both men giving everything. "You think you're hero?" Volkov spat blood. "You're just thug in leather." Edward blocked a strike. "Maybe, but I'm thug who protects children. What are you?" Volkov's fist connected with Edward's jaw. Edward went down hard, tasting copper. Volkov stood over him, weapon rising. "Say goodbye, Brewer." But Edward wasn't beaten. Sweep kick. Volkov fell. Edward was on him instantly, fists connecting with savage purpose. Years of rage behind each punch, not just for Claire and Julie, for his lost sister, for every victim who'd never gotten justice. FBI agents arrived from the failed roadblock, converging on the cabin. Volkov's men surrendered or fled. Volkov himself lay zip-tied, beaten, broken. Agent Collins stared at Edward, bloodied but standing. "You should be dead." Edward wiped blood from his mouth. "Yeah, but I'm not." Volkov and his men were arrested on federal charges that would ensure life sentences. The trafficking network was dismantled completely. Maritime Street, the warehouse, dozens of arrests across 3 countries. Julie and Claire were finally, truly safe. 3 months later, Julie's 9th birthday party filled the Iron Wolves clubhouse with laughter and streamers and the sound of children playing. Julie laughed, real laughter, the kind that comes from feeling safe, surrounded by brothers' kids who'd become her friends. Claire watched with tears of gratitude. New job as office manager at Reaper's Security Company. Small house rented with the club's help. Starting over, but not alone. Edward presented Julie with a phone. One contact saved. Uncle Edward. You ever need anything, day or night, you call me. Julie hugged him fiercely. You saved us. Edward shook his head. No, sweetheart. You saved yourselves. You sent that text. You refused to give up. You're the hero of this story. Party winding down, Edward stepped outside for air. Claire joined him, her hand finding his. I don't know how to thank you. You already did. You let me help. You gave me a chance to... He didn't finish, but Claire understood. To save the sister he couldn't. You're a good man, Edward Brewer. He looked at her. Really looked, seeing possibility for the first time. Maybe I am. Or maybe I'm just trying to be. Inside, Julie blew out candles, surrounded by Iron Wolves' family. Edward watched from the doorway, thinking about a child who'd sent a wrong number text and changed everything. The text message had read, He took Mum. I'm alone in the dark. But Julie Sapp wasn't alone anymore. She'd never be alone again, because sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right one. Sometimes heroes wear leather and ride motorcycles, and sometimes they come from the last place anyone would expect. Edward Brewer learned what he'd always suspected. Being strong doesn't mean hurting those weaker than you. It means protecting them, no matter what. No hesitation. That's what heroes do. That's what family does. And the Iron Wolves, they're both. If this story reminded you why courage matters, why one person refusing to give up can change everything, then you understand what this channel is about. We tell stories about people who refuse to stay silent when darkness demands action. People like Julie, who was 8 years old and terrified but sent that text anyway. People like Edward, who could have ignored a wrong number but chose to answer instead. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. Was it Julie's first words to Edward? The warehouse rescue? Or the final confrontation with Volkov? Your voice matters here, just like Julie's voice mattered that night. And if you're ready for more stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices when everything's on the line, subscribe now. Because the next story might be even more impossible than this one. Welcome to the family.